Welcome, everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive into a really fascinating book, Jeffrey Kripal's The Flip, Epiphanies of Mind and the Future of Knowledge from 2019.
Yeah, it definitely made some waves. It's one of those books that really tries to shake things up.
Exactly. It's been called mind-blowing important. And Kripal himself, well, he's quite a figure.
Oh, absolutely. He holds the J. Newton Razor Chair in Philosophy and Religious Thought at Rice University, heavily involved with the Esalen Institute. His background is really deep in religious history, especially, esoteric stuff, mysticism.
And the paranormal, which definitely comes through in this book.
Right. He's known for tackling subjects that sit at the edge, sometimes controversially.
So the aim for us today is to unpack the core argument of the flip. Essentially, Kripal is arguing that these extraordinary human experiences, he calls them flips or epiphanies of mind, they seriously challenge mainstream scientific materialism.
Uh-huh. And suggests something pretty radical, that maybe consciousness isn't just a byproduct of the brain, but something much more fundamental.
It's pitched almost as a manifesto, isn't it? A call for a big reassessment of how we view reality. And he wrote it in a deliberately accessible style, aiming for a broad audience.
Yeah, and there's a backstory there. Apparently, he found it hard to engage his STEM students with traditional religious texts. They often just dismiss them.
Ah, okay. So the flip was partly a response to that, trying to find a different way in.
It seems like it. Using these extraordinary experiences, things that are harder to dismiss, perhaps, as a bridge.
It feels quite strategic then. Not just describing weird stuff, but actively trying to connect the sciences and humanities.
And maybe, push back against what he sees as a kind of default materialist or even atheist bias among intellectuals, potentially helping bridge some cultural divides.
Okay, so let's nail down this core concept, the flip. What exactly is it?
At its most basic, it's a profound shift, a reversal of perspective, as he calls it. Someone goes through an experience and suddenly their whole understanding of themselves and the world is, well, flipped.
Flipped how?
Usually it's a shift from seeing reality as primarily external, objective, material, what Kripal calls the outside view.
Right, like what science normally measures.
Exactly. To a view where the internal, the subjective consciousness itself, the inside, feels more primary, more fundamental. It's moving from thinking matter creates mind to maybe mind is the basis of matter, or at least co-equal.
And this isn't necessarily about finding God in the traditional sense.
Not necessarily, no. That's a key point. While these experiences can feel deeply spiritual, Kripal presents them as potentially a more universal human thing, maybe even predating organized religion.
Okay.
He sees them as possibly the raw material from which religions might have emerged. And they often happen, suddenly, unbidden, sometimes linked to trauma or crisis.
And the insight gained isn't like solving a math problem.
No, it's described as more nonlinear, intuitive, a sudden realization, not a logical deduction.
So what kinds of experiences are we talking about? What triggers this flip?
Kripal casts a really wide net. Near-death experiences, or NDEs, are a big one.
Right, those stories are often very dramatic.
They are. And the fact that people report complex consciousness seemingly independent of brain function, that's a direct challenge to the brain as generator model.
Okay, NDEs. What else?
Things like telepathy, precognition, knowing things you shouldn't be able to know, maybe seeing future events in dreams.
Like that famous Mark Twain story.
Exactly. His dream about his brother's death and funeral, down to the details. Kripal mentions that. And also a case of a wife locating her dead husband's plane crash site through a dream. These suggest connections beyond normal space-time.
Psychedelics, too.
Yes, definitely. Experiences induced by psychedelics can radically alter perspective, fitting his model. Also, more classic mystical visions, encounters with anomalous phenomena, UFOs, apparitions.
Wow, okay, so a broad range.
Very broad. Even things like savant syndrome with its inexplicable abilities. And he connects it to historical conversion experiences too, like St. Paul on the road to Damascus, a radical sudden shift.
Now, you mentioned earlier this focus on scientists and rationalists who've had these experiences. Why is that so important to his argument?
Ah, yes. That's really a core part of his strategy, I think. By highlighting people deeply rooted in the very scientific or rational worldviews he's questioning.
It makes it harder to dismiss.
Precisely. It counters the idea that these are just experiences for, the woo-woo crowd or people already inclined to believe strange things.
It shows it can happen to supposedly hard-headed thinkers, too.
Exactly. He's trying to build credibility, especially for that STEM audience he wanted to reach. It demonstrates these experiences aren't confined to one type of person.
So who does he mention? Any well-known examples?
Quite a few, actually.
Mhm.
The neurosurgeon Ibn Alexander and his very public NDE account is probably one of the most famous recent ones.
I've heard of that one.
Then there's the philosopher A.J. Ayer, a really staunch logical positivist who apparently became much more open to the possibility of something beyond the physical after his own NDE late in life.
That's quite a shift for someone like Ayer.
It is. He also brings up Hans Berger, the pioneer of the EEG, the writer Barbara Ehrenreich, who wrote about her own unusual experiences, neuroscientist Marjorie Hines Wollicott.
Even Michael Shermer, the skeptic.
Yeah, Kripal suggests Shermer's views have evolved somewhat, based on Shermer's own writings about a powerful personal experience.
Interesting. And historical figures.
Oh, yes. He points to Marie Curie attending seances, the physicist Wolfgang Pauli's experiences with poltergeist phenomena,
Pauli, the Nobel laureate.
the very same. Also, Albert Einstein, whom Kripal describes as having a cosmically attuned mind, and then key figures in quantum physics like Schrödinger, Bohm, Bohr, many of whom explored mystical ideas alongside their physics. Kripal claims you could fill a small library with accounts of these transformations among scientists and thinkers.
So this flip is more than just, oh, I guess I was wrong about that. It sounds like it shakes your whole world.
Absolutely. He uses the term ontological destabilization.
Ontological,
Yeah.
meaning about the nature of reality itself.
Exactly. It's not just changing an opinion. It's a fundamental disruption of your perceived reality, your relationship to what you thought you knew. It makes you question basic assumptions, the reliability of your senses, the nature of time.
Because the experience itself often contradicts those assumptions.
Right. Interestingly, Kripal suggests this often doesn't lead to some new certainty, some new dogma.
Oh, what then?
Often it leads to ambiguity, uncertainty. The old framework is broken, but a new, neat one doesn't necessarily replace it. He actually argues for embracing that ambiguity.
That sounds uncomfortable.
It can be. These experiences are often described as ineffable, hard to put into words, hard to fit into existing boxes. It's an ontological shock that forces engagement with the unknown.
And you mentioned the humanities earlier. Is this uncertainty where they come in?
That's precisely Kripal's point. He argues the humanities, with their history of dealing with ambiguity, interpretation, and multiple perspectives, are crucial for navigating this kind of destabilization.
Okay, so the flip challenges materialism. Let's unpack Kripal's critique of materialism itself. He calls it half-right.
Yeah, he's careful not to dismiss science entirely. He sees huge value in the materialist approach for understanding the physical world, the outside.
But the half that's wrong is
The complete neglect of the inside subjective experience, consciousness itself. That's the major blind spot, he argues.
the famous hard problem of consciousness.
Exactly. How does inert matter, neurons firing, give rise to the feeling of being alive, the richness of subjective awareness? Materialism, he contends, fundamentally fails to explain that.
And he sees materialism as more than just a scientific method.
Yes, he pushes further, suggesting it often operates like an unspoken ideology, kind of dogma.
A belief system we don't always recognize as such.
Kind of. A set of assumptions about reality that have become dominant, maybe replacing older religious frameworks. It gives a technology which is powerful.
But maybe misses something essential about being human.
That's the argument. And he claims materialism maintains its success partly by just ignoring or explaining away inconvenient data.
Like these flip experiences.
Precisely. Anomalous phenomena, consciousness itself, anything that doesn't fit the neat material box gets sidelined. He quotes someone saying, "Materialism only wins as long as it gets to declare the rules of the game."
So we mistake technological power for ontological truth.
That's the danger he points to.
Yeah.
We see science working so well in the physical realm and assume that's all there is to reality.
So if materialism is only half the story, what's Kripal's alternative? How does he see mind and matter relating?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Instead of matter producing mind, the flip explores the idea that maybe consciousness or mind is the fundamental reality.
Whoa. So matter comes from mind? Or is secondary?
Something like that. Maybe matter is, as he puts it, minded in some way. It's a move away from that strict Cartesian split between mind and body towards a more integrated view.
And he draws on philosophical ideas here.
Oh, yes. He engages with a whole range of contemporary philosophies that challenge materialism. He talks about a kind of renaissance in the philosophy of mind right now.
Such as? What kind of philosophies?
He discusses things like panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental property of everything, even down to particles. Thinkers like Philip Goff or Bernardo Kastrup work on this.
Consciousness in rocks and
In
atoms.
some rudimentary form, yeah, that's the idea. Or idealism, also associated with Kastrup, which argues that reality itself is fundamentally mental or conscious.
Okay, those are pretty radical departures.
They are. He also mentions dual-aspect monism. Think Carl Jung or Harold Atmanspacher, which suggests mind and matter aren't separate things, but two aspects of one underlying reality.
Like two sides of the same coin?
Sort of. Kripal seems to lean towards something like this monistic view, maybe seeing the brain not as creating consciousness, but as somehow filtering or localizing a broader consciousness into our individual experience.
That sounds a bit like William James's idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He explicitly brings up James's transmitter or filter model of the brain, arguing it fits the data from NDEs and other anomalous experiences better than the producer model.
And does this fundamental consciousness stop at our skulls? Or does he go bigger?
He definitely goes bigger. He talks about a cosmic dimension. Phrases like, the human is cosmic and the cosmos is human, suggesting a deep, non-dual connection. We're not separate from the universe. Our consciousness is somehow part of a larger cosmic consciousness. Nature isn't just out there, it's intertwined with us.
And he connects this to physics, quantum stuff.
He does. He draws parallels with interpretations of quantum physics, things like non-locality, entanglement, suggesting they hint at an underlying unity that maybe everything is already one thing. He even speculates, quite poetically, that maybe the subjective feelings and mystical states, that sense of oneness or light, could be the inside view of the very physical phenomena like quantum fields that physics describes from the outside.
Blurring mind and matter right down to the fundamental level.
Exactly. But it's important to stress, he doesn't necessarily land on one definitive answer here.
Right. You mentioned earlier he embraces ambiguity.
Yes. While he clearly critiques materialism and points towards consciousness being primary, his own position seems more exploratory. Remember, he calls materialism half-right, uses cautious language like consciousness might be fundamental.
So he presents these philosophies as possibilities, not dogma.
I think so. It's more about showing there are serious, intellectually rigorous alternatives to materialism out there. The goal seems less about proving one specific new model and more about destabilizing the certainty of the old one.
Making space for other ways of knowing?
Precisely. He even calls the chapters essays, attempts, explorations, and says he doesn't have settled convictions. It's about legitimizing the experiences, legitimizing the questions, rather than providing all the answers.
Which naturally leads into his call for bringing the sciences and humanities together. How does he see that working?
Well, he sees the current separation, C.P. Snow's two cultures, as a major problem. Cutting us in half, he says.
Because science takes the outside, humanities the inside, and they don't talk.
Pretty much. And while Snow originally worried about humanists not understanding science, Kripal sort of flips that, suggesting maybe the sciences, dominated by materialism, have lost touch with the subjective. But really, his point is that both offer partial views.
So we need both working together.
Yes, a new kind of synthesis or consensus that integrates insights from both sides for a fuller picture of reality.
And what's the specific role he envisions for the humanities in this?
He argues for a revitalized, absolutely crucial role. He defines humanities very broadly, the study of consciousness coded in culture.
So history, literature, art, religion, philosophy.
Yes, and even looking at the cultural assumptions within science. He believes the humanities have a kind of inherent flipped structure because of their historical roots.
Roots in what?
Things like classical philosophy, Renaissance magic and Hermeticism, mystical theology, Platonism, traditions that often took consciousness or spirit as primary. This history, he thinks, gives humanities a unique prophetic potential.
Prophetic how? To predict the future.
No. More in the sense of being able to critique present assumptions, challenge power structures built on limited worldviews, and imagine fundamentally different ways of living and knowing.
And how do they do that? What are the tools?
He highlights two core humanistic methods. First, reflexivity.
Thinking about thinking.
Yeah, the ability to turn thought back on itself, to examine our own biases, our own cultural conditioning, the assumptions underlying our questions.
Okay, and the second?
The comparative approach. Looking across cultures, across time, across different belief systems, fairly and rigorously. This builds understanding and prevents us from thinking our way is the only way.
And these skills are vital now.
He argues they're more vital than ever. If consciousness is fundamental, then the disciplines that study its expressions in culture become absolutely central, not peripheral.
It's a strong claim for the humanities' importance.
It really is. He even floats this idea of a religion of no religion, like a way of engaging seriously and sympathetically with the world's spiritual traditions, learning from them, but without necessarily buying into any one dogma. An alternative, perhaps, to both rigid fundamentalism and a kind of sterile materialism.
And the ultimate goal of bringing science and humanities together like this.
It's quite visionary, really. He hopes for a profound societal transformation. If we adopt a worldview where mind and consciousness are seen as central,
You might act differently.
that's the hope. Maybe less environmental destruction if we see ourselves as part of a conscious cosmos, not just exploiting dead matter. Maybe less inequality, less conflict. He talks about fostering a greater wisdom community.
Through what he calls cosmic humanism.
Yes, seeing ourselves as expressions of a conscious universe. It's a very hopeful, almost utopian vision built on this epistemological shift.
So, to sum up that part, humanities become the custodians of the subjective, the inside, complementing science's focus on the outside.
That captures it well. The flip is into subjectivity, and humanities have the tools, reflexivity, comparison to navigate that territory. Religious studies, his own field, is well suited to looking at these strange things people report. So, yeah, essential partners for science.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and talk about how Kripal builds his case. What's his methodology like in the book? What evidence does he use?
It's definitely eclectic. He draws from everywhere.
Right.
Philosophy of mind, interpretations of quantum physics, neuroscience findings, comparative mysticism, evolutionary theory, ecology, history of science, history of religion, and crucially, tons of personal stories.
It sounds very synthetic, pulling lots of threads together.
Extremely synthetic. And that's part of its appeal for many readers. He weaves these disparate strands into a coherent, often compelling narrative.
And you said personal stories are crucial.
Absolutely central. Those impossible true tales of people experiencing the flip are his primary evidence, really. The raw data that he argues materialism can't account for.
But aren't those often dismissed as just anecdotes?
Ah, yes. And Kripal tackles that head on. He argues that calling them anecdotes is a way of disempowering them, of refusing to engage with their implications.
So how does he defend using them?
He basically appeals to simple human trust. He suggests we have to take people's reports of their own profound experiences seriously, at least provisionally, if we want to understand the full range of human possibility.
And he insists these paranormal or anomalous experiences, telepathy, NDEs, etc., should be treated as real data points.
Very much so. He argues strongly that these things do happen, and they constitute significant evidence challenging the completeness of materialism. It's similar to arguments made by others, like Alfred Russel Wallace back in the day.
Darwin's contemporary?
Right. Or Lawrence Lishan more recently. The idea that you don't just throw out facts because they don't fit your theory, maybe you need to adjust the theory. Kripal sees these anomalous experiences as vital clues about consciousness and reality.
But this is where the main criticisms of the book come in, isn't it? This reliance on stories.
It is, yes. While he defends it vigorously, it's the point critics most often target.
What are the specific concerns?
Well, the anecdotal nature, primarily. Can individual stories, however powerful, really form the basis for overturning established scientific understanding? There are questions about the lack of controls, the potential for confirmation bias.
Meaning she might focus on stories that fit his thesis.
Potentially, yes. And critics might say he sometimes relies on the sheer persuasive power of the narrative, rather than, say, verifiable, repeatable evidence in a lab setting.
Which he seems skeptical of for these kinds of states anyway.
Right. He questions whether extreme spontaneous states can be reliably replicated in a lab, which itself is controversial. His pushback against the term anecdote is also seen by some as sidestepping valid concerns about evidence quality.
So it sounds like his methodology is the argument, in a way.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
Right.
By choosing to center personal stories, subjective experience, anomalous phenomena stuff materialism often excludes.
He's arguing for a different way of knowing, a broader epistemology.
Exactly. He's challenging the hierarchy of evidence that puts, say, controlled experiments at the very top and personal testimony way down at the bottom. He's challenging disciplinary silos by being so transdisciplinary. The way he writes the book embodies the thesis. Understanding reality needs more than just the materialist toolkit. It needs these other human experiences and interpretive frameworks.
Okay, we've covered a huge amount of ground. Let's try and summarize the absolute core of Kripal's argument in the flip.
All right, so point one. These intense personal experiences, the flips, they happen, and they seriously challenge standard scientific materialism.
Point two.
Point two. These flips suggest consciousness isn't just a brain byproduct. It might be fundamental to reality itself.
Okay.
Point three. Because of this, we desperately need a better dialogue, a real integration between the sciences and the humanities. They both hold pieces of the puzzle.
And finally,
Finally, understanding this, embracing this new perspective where mind is central, could lead to a profoundly different, hopefully better, future for humanity. A kind of cosmic humanism.
why do you think the flip continues to resonate? Why should people engage with it now?
Well, it taps right into ongoing debates that haven't gone away. The mystery of consciousness is hotter than ever in philosophy and science.
True.
People are increasingly interested in alternatives to strict materialism. And within religious studies, it provides a framework for taking phenomena like mysticism, esotericism, the paranormal seriously as having real-world implications.
And its accessibility helps.
Definitely. Cripple brings these complex academic discussions out to a wider audience, which is really valuable. It gets people thinking, questioning their own assumptions, maybe making sense of their own unusual experiences.
So, weighing it all up, the impact, the limitations, what's your overall take?
I think its biggest success is provoking thought and starting conversations.
Yeah.
It's a powerful synthesis, engagingly written, and it mounts a strong challenge to materialist complacency. That's its strength.
And the weakness.
The main weakness, or at least the main hurdle for many, remains that reliance on anecdotal evidence. While Kripal defends it, for those looking for traditional scientific proof, it might feel unsatisfying.
So it highlights the problem, but maybe doesn't fully solve it methodologically.
You could say that. It brilliantly illuminates the phenomenon of the flip and the inadequacy of materialism to explain it, but building a universally accepted bridge between that subjective experience and scientific validation, that remains the challenge.
Okay, let's wrap up. What's one final thought you'd want to leave our listeners mulling over from Kripal's The Flip?
Maybe it's this fundamental tension the book throws into such sharp relief. On the one hand, you have the undeniable power and reality of these profound inner experiences for the people who have them. They can change lives. Kripal makes you feel that.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's the immense difficulty of translating that private subjective reality into the kind of public, verifiable knowledge that our scientific culture usually demands.
The inner world versus the outer explanation.
Exactly. Kripal champions the humanities' ways of knowing narrative, trust, interpretation as valid paths. But they don't always satisfy the criteria of objective proof. So the book highlights this deep conflict, this gap between subjective certainty and public explanation, especially across that science-humanities divide.
It shows us the power of the phenomena.
Absolutely. But maybe doesn't give us the final agreed-upon map for navigating the territory between inner experience and shared understanding. It really leaves you questioning, what counts as real? How do we know? And are our current frameworks adequate for the full spectrum of human experience?